Hey, on this video we're going to go over the geologic timescale notes, and we're just going to give a brief overview, not get into too much detail, but just provide you some context of when things or when organisms evolved throughout our history. So first up, let's talk about how scientists divide up the time periods of Earth. So there's eons, eras, periods, and epochs. We're mostly going to worry about eras and periods for this class. But here, so this diagram here shows you starting from the day going back. Eons are the longest periods of time, and then eras are divided up within that. So this, like eon here, doesn't have any divisions of eras, but this one, all the rest of them do. So you can notice like this one has four different eras within it, and then there's periods divided up within that, and then epochs are just within that, and we're not really going to focus too much on that right there. Right. This, which is on the back of your guided notes, or there's a chart very similar to it, just kind of shows you a comparison of, okay, we have this eon, these are the eras and periods within it, and so on. So we're mainly going to focus again on eras and periods. You do not need to memorize the order of any of these. You will need to know when some organisms evolved. We're only going to focus on animals, of course, because this is zoology. So I'll bring up some plants during these notes, but for test purposes, you'll need to know when the main groups of organisms like first arrived, so like the first reptiles or first fish, that kind of thing, and the era and period for that. But again, you don't need to memorize the order of these unless you really just feel led to do that kind of thing, but it will not be on your test. All right. So first up, let's talk about the Precambrian era. This was occurred 4.54 billion years ago, all the way up to 544 million years ago, and this is when the Earth first formed. The first cells showed up. There was algae, there was some bacteria, the first cells with the nucleus in them, and then we got some multicellular organisms, and then all the way to start off with our first marine worms and jellyfish arriving. So quite a era of all those things occurring. Sounds kind of boring, but I mean that's when life first got here on Earth. Right. Moving on, now we're into the Paleozoic era, starting off with the Cambrian period. So this started when the last one ended, so that was 544 million years ago, and the organisms included the Burgess shale, as well as the first animals with hard parts trilobites, like this guy here. Pretty tough exterior on him. Then also in the Paleozoic era was the Ordovician period. I don't know if that's exactly how you say that name, but close enough. All right. The time period began 505 million years ago, and this is when the first fish arrived, which looked kind of like this weird guy over here, as well as the first fossil evidence of some plants on land. All right. So then we've got the Silurian period, which began 438 million years ago, and this is when we got more evolved land plants that had more vascular land plants, and we also had the oldest lungfish fossils, like this guy in this picture here. Then came the first mass extinction, which occurred 439 million years ago. About 86% of life on Earth was wiped out, which was caused by glaciers and falling sea levels. There was also too many plants, which removed way too much CO2, so it threw off that nice balance, which of course led some things to die off. Next up in the Paleozoic era was the Devonian period. It began 408 million years ago. This is when they discovered the first mosses, the first insects, which were beetles, scorpions, as well as centipedes, 385 million years ago. There was the first lobed-finned fishes, the first land animals, which were amphibians, the first sharks, and the first seed plants, which were ferns. Right? Then came around the second mass extinction, which was 364 million years ago. This time, 75% of life was wiped out. And it might have been one big event or a series of events. There's still some debate, but scientists believe that giant land plants released nutrients into the ocean, which led to mass algal blooms, or a lot of algae in the water, which depleted the ocean of its oxygen. And then volcanic ash caused the Earth temps to drop as well. So there's at least a couple theories on that. Right. Moving on in the Paleozoic era was the Mississippian period. That began 360 million years ago, and the first reptiles arrived 330 million years ago. Then there was the Pennsylvanian period. Not a lot really happened, besides just a lot of arthropods or insects and the like, and as well as amphibians just started evolving, and that was 320 million years ago. Then there was the Permian period, which began 286 million years ago. This is when the first sailed back reptiles occurred, which is this guy in this picture here. And then the end of the Paleozoic era occurred, and 96% of all life on Earth perished at this point, which was the third mass extinction 251 million years ago. Scientists theorized that volcanic eruptions emitted lots of CO2, and then bacteria started emitting methane gas, and the oceans became quite acidic, which could not support life. All right. Now we're moving into the Mesozoic era, which was the Triassic period. It began 245 million years ago. So the first crocodiles arrived and the first dinosaurs arrived. The first mammals arrived, which were very shrew-like, as well as the first turtles came about. So the first dinosaurs, remember, were in the Triassic and Mesozoic era. Right? So then we move into the Jurassic period, which began 208 million years ago. More dinosaurs arrived, as well as the first bird, which was very dinosaur-like-ish. But the Stegosaurus came around, as well as several other dinosaurs. But then there was the next mass extinction was the Triassic-Jurassic extinction that lasted from 214 million years ago to 199 million years ago. So it was quite a long, that's millions of years in time that this extinction occurred over. It wasn't just one instant extinction that a lot of people visualize, like an asteroid just striking the Earth and like things being wiped out. It actually took a few million years for everything to be wiped out. So there were several phases of loss, which included asteroids, climate change, and a flood of basalt eruptions. All right, so then we entered the Cretaceous period, which began 144 million years ago. It had the first flowering plants. It had some more dinosaurs coming up, like the Triceratops and the T-Rex and the Velociraptor, so two probably of the more famous dinosaurs. Didn't actually arrive during the Jurassic period. They came after the fact. But of course, then we have another mass extinction. Of course, why not? So it happened 65 million years ago. It was the extinction of the dinos, which included volcanoes going off, asteroids, climate change, and it wiped out about 76% of life. All right. So now we enter into the Cenozoic era. It's the Tertiary period began it, and it began 65 million years ago. We've got the first ancestors of dogs and cats. We've got grasses coming about. We've got ancestors of pigs and deer. We've got horses. We've got rabbits. We've got some of the first monkeys. And we've got the oldest human-like ancestor, which were called hominids, about 4 million years ago. All right, and then lastly, we've got the Quaternary period of the Cenozoic era, which began about 2 million years ago, and is when the current ice age actually began. And there was the oldest direct human ancestor fossils, which were 1 million years ago, and then the first modern man of Homo sapiens was 0.1 million years ago. And then there was also the mammoth and the mastodons of 0.05 million years ago. So but that is it for our brief overview. Again, for test purposes, I need you to know the eras and the periods of when the main things arrived. So we're talking about like the first reptiles, the first mammals, the first like when dinosaurs first came around, that kind of thing. Not don't worry about knowing when plants. Don't worry about knowing the order of the eras or the periods. All right. But if you have any questions, feel free to let me know and ask away. So.